Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Amanda English. And I'm a psychiatrist. Amanda is a marriage and family therapist, and we're going to be sharing with you today a very hot, interesting topic, and it is going to be on narcissism. So we're going to be talking about not just the typical aspects of narcissism, but we're also going to bring up some sides of narcissism that you might not be so familiar with. So hold on to your hats. Here we go. So Amanda, tell me a little bit about your experience with narcissism. I mean, is this something that you have encountered in your practice? And what do you typically notice when you encounter someone with narcissism?
Well, just on that note, not too many people actually come to therapy when they're narcissistic because you'd have to assume you needed help. And that's not a trait of a narcissist. So I don't get to see as many in the practice that I work in now, with you and everything. But I used to see it a lot more when I worked with mandated clients because they're the ones that don't want to come see me. They don't need help, or they think they don't need help. And so they're the ones, because of things that they've done, breaking the law and that sort of thing, they have to come. But they'll use all kinds of excuses when they get there. Oh, I meant to do this. This was my goal. They're just making me look bad and stuff. They're using me as an example to everybody else and stuff. But I didn't do anything that big of a deal. Or I wanted to be in this situation. This is exactly what I wanted. And they're just helping me have a vacation from my job or something. Otherwise, I would have been, not gotten a vacation in a while, and this is great. So that's the kind of stuff you see when you get, those typical narcissists.
Absolutely. And I've noticed that too in my own practice, that oftentimes the narcissists I encounter are not really seeking help on their own volition, but they have actually been pressured by family or other people in their lives, or even legal circumstances to seek help. So that being said, what are some of the traits of narcissism that you might notice come up when in a typical narcissistic picture that would be red flags for you?
Yeah. And I have to say with that the other type of narcissist I see is the one that comes to help their family member. Like they're in a relationship and, oh, this person needs help and I'm just here to support them and everything, but I'm fine. So that's actually one of the traits, is this grandiose sort of like, I'm all that and nobody can touch me. I'm at the top of my game. I can't do anything wrong. That sort of thing. Sometimes it's a sense of entitlement or this constant looking for praise and acknowledgement of the accomplishments and things that they've done. Those are some of the main ones that we see.
Yeah, I was looking at this earlier today. It's kind of interesting. They've come up with this narcissistic personality inventory, and there's like these 4 domains that they talk about, and the 4 domains are a sense of power, like really almost this unquenchable thirst for power, and I need to be in control. And then a second domain is self-admiration, really looking at themselves and just, the typical picture you have is someone that's constantly looking at themselves in the mirror and whatnot. But it's not just their looks, it's also admiring how smart they are and how good they are at all these different things and everything. So really believing, this very strong belief that they are amazing at everything. And not just amazing, but actually a third domain is superior, superior to other people. And there might be some other people that are pretty good at football, but not really
like
any.
me.
Exactly. and then the fourth domain is a sense of entitlement. Like, well, the rules apply to that guy over there, but not to me. I don't really need to play by the rules because I'm
Mhm.
special, right?
Yeah. And if you don't know much about this, if this is kind of a new thing to you, you might actually be really drawn to the person because they're very convincing. They can actually be quite charming and make you believe that you're going to be, riding on their coattails of glory and everything into whatever situation they want to take you into, and you're lucky to be with them.
That's right. That actually is a very interesting point because a lot of these people can be really charming and rope people in.
Mhm.
And curiosity question, in your experience, when what type of people would tend to be attracted to people that have narcissism?
Yeah, sometimes it's people who are at the top of their game too, you
Hmm.
know? We don't think of it that way. Sometimes we think of people who are insecure, but you can have people on all ends of the spectrum like, "Yeah, I'm at the top of my game and you're at the top of your game and maybe you can help me," and that sort of thing. But the other person might have some compassion and some empathy, but they just like where that person's going. But then on the other end of the spectrum, it can be somebody who, they don't feel like they could get to those places or be in that situation without that person. So, unbeknownst to them, they're actually feeding the narcissism by like spending time with them and, talking with them and going, wow, you really are great. And wow, thank you so much. Not realizing that there's an ugly side of it too.
Yeah, so it does sound like there's not just one type of personality
Hmm.
that's going to be attracted to someone with narcissism, but it it could be someone that's almost like on that same level, but maybe not quite overtly narcissistic. And
Hmm.
then there could be other people that would just like feed that ego of the
Yeah,
narcissist.
they
And
call it narcissistic supply. You
yeah,
just keep feeding it and that's what the narcissist is looking for too. People that if you don't give that, you're trash the next minute. So you have to be careful what you're doing because the more you feed into that, the more they need it and you could get hurt.
absolutely. And that's a really good point. I've realized, and I know we're going to talk a little more about
Mhm.
this later on, but I've realized that people that are in relationships with narcissists, the narcissist has an extremely difficult time letting go of that
Mhm.
person. And and I think a big part of that is because the narcissist almost feels like I'm entitled, like that person actually belongs to me. I own
Yeah.
them. And it's more of a sense of like objectifying people and what can you do for me rather than really truly caring for them.
Mhm. And I think that's important to point out that caring for them part because one of the things I didn't see early on when I was dealing with narcissists and stuff like that is I didn't recognize there's this side of narcissism where people can go, "Well, they're so nice to me though," or "Oh, they make me look good in public." And they think that that's empathy or that's, some kind of compassion or caring. But if it's a true narcissist, they're doing that because if you look good, then they look good.
Mm,
And you'll
mhm,
see that because you might look really good in public with them. They'll say, "Oh yeah, look at my wife," or "Oh yeah, look at my child, or look how great they are." But then when you get home, it's you didn't do this, you didn't do that.
mhm.
I had to stand up there by myself and do all these things and you didn't do this or you're making me look bad or something like that. But in public, they'll never do
Yeah.
that. I
It's like a
rem
false humility,
Yeah,
basically.
but the person will go, "Wait, I'm confused, they can't be narcissist because they make me look good,"
Yeah.
But it's never for you, it's always for them, and I remember I worked with somebody who, um, he was in a very it was a juvenile, and, I say that because I worked with juvenile delinquents.
Mhm.
That's not the PC way to say at-risk teens. But I remember he kept talking up his mom, and I was like, she's kind of in a poverty-stricken situation. She doesn't come and visit him, and, she was not mentally well. And I remember thinking, "Why does he talk her up so much?" But he had to. If he said anything true about what his mom's experience was, then he'd have to make himself look bad. So he
Mm.
had to make this woman who was struggling, just in a very bad situation, he had to keep talking her up because that was the only way he could look good.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how people that have those traits, they might actually look like they're building somebody up, but it's really in the end it's all about them, right? Instead
Mm-hmm.
of about the other person. I even think
Yeah.
about like the football players, and I'm not saying that all football players are narcissistic, but
Mm-hmm.
they'll score a touchdown and then be like, "Praise God," and all
Yeah.
giving glory to God apparently, but really they're wanting to look good and
Mm-hmm.
show like how yeah.
How
So
much God likes them and gave them that
yes,
touchdown sort
exactly.
of thing. It's like, wow, you're connected to God. You must be really good because he gave you that touchdown
That's
sort of
right.
thing.
It's amazing. So
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of the classic picture of narcissism, but there's also another more subtle side of narcissism,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd like to hear from you. And I think we call that usually covert narcissism, right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, so the one we've been talking about is considered what we call like overt narcissism. And I always think of that as like just thinking of it as over the top. So overt is over the top, covert is kind of under the radar and stuff. But it still has a lot of the same traits. But instead of being, this great person, that's constantly complimenting how great and wonderful they are and surrounding themselves with by being charming with people and stuff. They're more of the person who is maybe not so charming. They're sort of down on their luck seeming or a victim, but there's this sense of like real resentment and judgment towards the world for their situation. And so they're constantly sabotaging situations for themselves. Like, they might say something like, "Oh, I could have been better if this, and that had happened." Or, "Oh, I could have been, that great businessman or woman or something like that if only, the pandemic hadn't happened and I lost my job or something." And then they sort of go into this passive aggressive, like, if this hadn't happened, oh, these people did this to me sort of thing. Then it feels real manipulative though,
Mhm.
because they're never willing to actually do something about it. It's almost the excuses reinforce why I can't get up there and do something.
Yeah, and when I'm listening to you describe that, I mean, it almost sounds like a victim mentality on steroids.
Mhm.
And it's almost like it sounds like somebody that has the real potential for
Mhm.
narcissism, and it's almost like they want to be a narcissist if they had maybe some of these
Mhm.
charming abilities or something like this, but because they are, like you said, down on their luck and they haven't
Mhm.
achieved those things, now that's where the anger and the resentment can come in, and then they can maybe even like sabotage um, other people's success, and they
Yes.
want a lot of attention
Mhm.
directed at them because it's still at the end of the day they want it to be all about them, right?
Yeah, and that's the key ingredient in narcissism is it's always about me. It's either me being so great or me being I could have been great if this and this and this had happened. And then they like to even sabotage other people, even the ones close to them. This is one of the differences between the overt and the covert narcissist is the overt narcissist likes to be around people who are doing really well
Hmm.
because that makes them look good.
Mm-hmm.
The covert narcissist is going to sabotage everyone around them so they never look better than them. Like
Hmm.
their kid, say it's a parent, their kid tries to go and do something and the kid's looking like they're going to accomplish it. And say it's a mom or a dad and they go, "Oh, I could have done that too if I had all of the privileges that you have going into it. We didn't have that when I was growing up." And so you almost feel guilty like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this then because, that's not fair or my parents not going to, like it or something. And they always do this sort of dig at whatever success that you have so that they can continue to reinforce that victim mentality in themselves.
Wow. So that's pretty heavy because sometimes it's
Mhm.
easy to look at those overt and be like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely not that because
Mhm.
look, I'm, not all grandiose and all of this, but there's these more subtle end of the spectrum that people might actually be able to fall in the trap into a little bit
Mhm.
easier. Uh, how do we know actually? Because there's, of course, lots of traits that we're talking about, like selfishness and even depression and victim mentality and that sort of thing. How do we know the difference between some of these other disorders or traits
Mm-hmm.
and actually being a narcissist?
I think that's really important that we talk about this because sometimes, we're kind of in this catch-22. We live in a world where we love to label people like, oh, they're a narcissist because they did this or something. But sometimes, a little bit of information is dangerous. We want to go, oh, because of this, they must be this. But, people have to have certain traits pervasively. It's not just well, they tend to be selfish because they like to do this or something, but you really do see some empathy come out in the person, and it's not just to glorify themselves, but you see, maybe you see a moment of like compassion in them or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And selfishness can be learned. And so sometimes people are in situations where maybe they learn that more so, and they can unlearn some of those traits too. And the same with covert, sometimes people are truly depressed and they've learned that depression. It's not just about manipulating people so they can be a victim. And I think we really have to weigh, I don't want to just go and say somebody's narcissist because they have this trait. Maybe because they're not pervasively like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Mm-hmm.
see it come up quite a bit. And sometimes, if we can justify what we're doing, we'll do it, even though we're not truly narcissists. We just haven't learned to consider others more and stuff. So, we have to consider like if there's a sense of humility, but a true narcissist, you will never be able to get them to understand what you're trying to say. And that's why we tell people who
Mm-hmm.
are dealing with narcissists, don't fight with them. You're not going to win.
Yeah.
But if you find that you try to explain something to someone and they get it or they're struggling with it, but you see, there's like something in them that there's some compassion or some
Mm-hmm.
empathy, then okay, this isn't a real narcissist. They have some selfish traits or they may be, victimized in their depression or something like that, but they're not a manipulative person. And
Yeah.
that's really
And I
important.
think that's a really important distinction. So it's really that pervasive self-centeredness. It's that
Mhm.
pervasive ongoing lack of empathy.
Mhm.
It's that ongoing all about me and the world rotates around me and how can I use other people to get ahead
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And so it is important because, certainly all of us have some of these traits
Oh,
from time to time,
yeah.
just being human beings, right?
Mhm.
And we need to be careful not to just either automatically label ourselves as narcissist or everyone around us. And I've seen
Mhm.
people kind of fall into that trap too, where they're just like, oh yeah, my husband's a narcissist or my wife, or, everyone's a narcissist now.
Yeah, my boss is a
Exactly.
narcissist,
And then anyone you don't like is a narcissist, and that's the problem, right?
I can just put them out because they're a narcissist. I don't have
Exactly.
to, yeah.
And I don't think that's healthy either.
Mhm.
On the other hand, the research does show that over the years, narcissism actually is on the rise. Any
Mhm.
thoughts about why we're getting more narcissism? Is that just because
Yeah.
people are looking for it more, or do you think that there really is more narcissism in our society?
Yeah, I hate to beat a dead horse, but sometimes, the media really helps do this, Um, I was talking to you about that ad I saw when I was driving, I won't say the freeway. It might still be up there, but I remember seeing this ad that was talking about, "Oh, it's not your fault you're in this situation. It's this, inanimate object or this thing that doesn't really have any control over you. It's that fault. It's that issue's fault." And so what we're really doing is actually reinforcing a victim mentality, or even, I think I watched the news once, and at the end of it, they were saying like, yeah, give us your perspective on this, jump online and tell us what you think on this issue. And I thought to myself, I'm not an expert in that area. Why would you want my opinion? But what we're doing, I think, in society is because we're trying to get people connected. We want sort of pander to their sense of, I deserve this and I have something to say. And so we're really feeding this sort of like egocentric, sense of self that a lot of people maybe don't want to have, but we're feeding it so much that we can't help but see these traits come out more and more.
Absolutely. And when you look at the different things that we do with media, right? I mean, even look at iPhone, iPad, it's like all focused around me, right?
Yeah.
Around me. Yeah.
I
Around
never thought of that. That's a good perspective.
Yeah. And it certainly, it's also, you think about like social media, for example,
Mhm.
talk about self-admiration, right? Or doing selfies and posting
Mhm.
all these things about myself, and then, thinking about like superiority, right? It's like comparing myself with other people on social
Yeah.
media, and oh yeah,
I have to go
well,
on a better vacation or I have to,
exactly. And so this sense of competition and entitlement, it's like, yeah, like you said, people just constantly are getting more and more pandered to in our society. And like you said, it's maybe all the motives aren't wrong, but you can see that these core domains of narcissism
Mhm.
are actually being perpetuated by the media.
Yeah.
And I think part of that even started back in the 1960s and 70s, where you had
Mhm.
this self-esteem solution, and the more you can focus on feeling better about yourself, the happier you're going to be. But there's it's good to have good self-worth. I agree with that, but I think
Mhm.
there's a darker side to that too.
Yeah, and I think I would just challenge our listeners to pay attention to how many times they hear the phrase "you deserve this."
Yes.
And it's not a need, it's a want. And it might
Mhm.
even be sabotaging our long-term goals by getting those things or taking those things or consuming those things. But if I keep telling myself I deserve this, I can continue lying to myself that I'm entitled to those things too.
That's so true, and I hear that all the time, and sometimes I'm even tempted to tell myself, "Oh, you've worked hard. You deserve this," And it's true that there's we talk about people
Mhm.
getting reward for working hard and all that,
Yeah.
so it's not all bad, but we just have to be careful not to take it to that extreme, I think.
Mhm. And that's what we're talking about. That's what narcissism is. It's the extreme.
Exactly. So, let's say that we've identified some of these red flags in
Mhm.
someone that we know. How do we deal with a narcissist in our lives? And of course, it might be easy if it's someone just meeting casually. But let's say this is already somebody that we've kind of, they're kind of there to stay in some ways. Like it's hard to kind of get disentangled from them. How do we
Mhm.
deal with that?
Oh man, like it's such a complicated issue with such a simple answer that it almost seems like what? The best thing to do is if you're not in a relationship with this person where you're like committed to that relationship, the best thing to do is steer clear as much as possible.
Mm,
You never want to fight with a narcissist. You will lose every single time and you'll lose because you get hurt.
hmm
It's not just you'll lose because you didn't have the better argument. You'll lose because they'll be cruel, they'll be hurtful, and you're not capable of that. So it will really hurt you to the core. If you're in a relationship with somebody like that, again, don't fight them. A narcissist needs to know, especially an overt narcissist, needs to know that they're going to get something out of it. So if you want to attempt therapy with them, you might have to say something like, "Hey, I think, we need to let's improve our relationship," or something like that. But very little are you going to actually get something out of them. You're probably better off going to therapy on your own to learn how to, maneuver around the
hmm
person.
hmm
And if you are with a covert narcissist, the best thing to do is recognize you're not going to get them to not be a victim. There
hmm
is not enough, Florence Nightingale in you to help that person get out of their victim mentality. You will not be the nurse that rescues them. You will not be the savior that saves them. they will always find another reason to be the victim.
Yeah, that bottomless pit of need
Yes.
in a way. And so just
Mhm.
stop trying. I mean, what I'm
Cut your
hearing,
losses.
yeah, what I'm hearing is really disengage. Don't try to please them. Don't try to get
Mhm.
your love needs met by them. And it really is
Yes.
sad, but it's the truth. And,
Mhm.
I think the more people try to like fix or try to save or try to please, actually it becomes
It reinforces
it
it.
reinforces it. And
Mhm.
so I think having those boundaries are sometimes the only ways that a narcissist may be even able to recognize, but that
Mhm.
I've almost never seen, unfortunately, which is sad to
No,
say it.
and they'll move on to someone
Yeah.
else. That's what's going to happen is you'll get hurt because they'll say something and then they'll move on to someone else if you refuse to engage with them. And they'll just get their needs. We call it needs, but it's not actually a need.
Right.
They'll get that from somebody else and you can pray for that person.
Absolutely. Now, before we close, I just have one last question, and that is if we're noticing that maybe we're having some of these narcissistic traits and we don't want to
Mhm.
propagate that or become more narcissistic, what can we do to
Mhm.
actually mitigate those traits?
Yeah, if you're noticing, maybe your relationships aren't working because maybe there's a selfishness that is growing or something, or you feel entitled to, be whatever you want to be or do things to people and stuff. One of the best things you can do is, spend time with people who need help themselves,
Mm,
encourage yourself to recognize like, hey, what I think I need is maybe not a need, it's just a want. And there are plenty of people who are struggling, real people who are struggling, not covert narcissists, but real people who are in a situation, and help those people.
mhm.
Find ways that you can, benefit them, and then don't post it on social media.
Good
Don't
point.
have pictures taken, don't videotape yourself doing it, but do it from a genuine desire to just feel good for seeing people do better and stuff. And I think it's a lot of times it's what we don't do that really helps us, and that's, stay off of social media. Don't
Mhm.
assume that everybody needs to hear your perspective on something. I guarantee you somebody else has already given your perspective
You
and
mean
you
I'm not an expert on everything? Come on, Amanda.
no, and you do not need to argue with everybody too that disagrees with you. But yeah, if I had a penny for every time I was about to write something and I didn't, I'd be a very rich woman right now because I've had to stop myself even because it's hard. It's so tempting to want to like convert somebody to your idea when you see, somebody, but recognizing I don't need to be the one to do that.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not the end all be all of this thing resolving. And just, for me as a Christian, I think one of the best ways that I can do that is recognize who I am in relation to who God
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
I don't make my blood flow through my veins. I don't make my chest rise and fall with each breath. That's something that's entirely orchestrated by God.
Yeah, having that humble perspective, it puts
Mhm.
things in the right perspective. So helping others and I think cultivating gratitude can go so
Mhm.
far in helping us to maintain that humility too. Well, thank you so much, our
Yeah.
listeners, for being with us today. Thank you,
Mhm.
Amanda, for sharing your expertise. We have a lot to learn about
Yeah.
narcissism, about the red flags in other people, but also even in our own lives,
Yeah.
and really looking at things that we can do to cultivate a good a healthy state of humility and healthy relationships of truly
Mhm.
caring for one another.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.